To start off, I'm a 20-year-old female, and this story took place 4 years ago when I was 16. When I was a little kid, I played video games a little, but never really got into them until I was around 14 years old. My first boyfriend, whose name I would like to forget, spent most of his free time playing games online. Spending time over at his house is what introduced me to online gaming. At first, he would have me play with him because he thought it was funny, but after enough time, I actually started getting pretty good. Once I was able to hold my own in online play, I really started to enjoy gaming. So when my boyfriend and I broke up, I eventually bought an Xbox for myself. I made an account of my own and continued playing online. Eventually, I made a small group of friends online who I played with regularly. Most of them used headsets to communicate while playing, but I didn't really feel comfortable doing that at first, so I usually just communicated through written messages. After a couple months of playing with my normal group, I eventually started looking at them as real friends. It was at this point that I decided to start using a headset. Most of them seemed pretty surprised to find out I was a girl, and I definitely seemed to start getting a little more attention once I began using the headset. My username didn't give my gender away, so I believe everyone just kind of assumed I was a guy. For the most part, the attention I received wasn't in a weird or bad way, at least not from my friends. Occasionally, I would run into a creep while playing against randoms, but I would just block people if they got too carried away. It's just a regular thing a lot of female gamers seem to have to deal with. The longer I continued gaming, the more friends I developed. Eventually we began referring to each other on a first-name basis. This really didn't concern me, as I never gave out any identifying information, just my first name. Things continued to evolve when it came to my online gaming, and eventually, several of us from our normal group decided to make a clan. It was at this point that one of the members who helped start the clan suggested that everyone from the clan become friends on Facebook. We also created a page on Facebook for the clan, where we made a schedule and posted information for those who may be interested in joining our clan. Not wanting to give out a bunch of my personal information, I decided to make a second Facebook account. My first name was real on this account, but in place of my last name, I put the name of our clan. Things went well for a while, and I was really enjoying my online life in the video gaming community I'd built with my friends. Many people joined and left the clan over a period of time, but one of these people stands out more than the rest. His name was Tony. I'm not positive how he found out about our clan, but he wanted to join. When he teamed up with us, he played pretty well. We encouraged everyone in our clan to have a headset for communicating during matches, but it wasn't required. Tony said that his headset wasn't working, and he didn't have money to get a new one because he was only 15. He played well enough and was really good at following our schedule, so we let him join despite him not having a headset. It didn't take long for him to begin messaging me on a regular basis after I added him on Facebook. I didn't pay much attention to his profile on Facebook. He just looked like a regular 15-year-old guy and didn't have a whole lot of friends. Although his messages were pretty persistent, they didn't come across as inappropriate. At least, not at first. Eventually his messages began to get out of control. He would message me, and if I didn't reply within 20 minutes, he would message me again, asking me why I was ignoring him. When he first started acting like this, I would respond by letting him know I wasn't ignoring him, I was just busy. He would ask me what I was busy with, and any other questions he could to learn more about my life. After this went on for a while, I couldn't take it anymore, and began ignoring him completely. The longer I ignored him for, the more frequently he would message me. Eventually, other members of our clan started messaging me, informing me that Tony was messaging them, asking about me. We all started getting pretty weirded out by Tony, and all of us deleted him from both Facebook and our friends list on Xbox. The messages still continued after deleting Tony, and they even became somewhat aggressive, which prompted me to block Tony on every platform we used to be friends on. this only worked temporarily, as Tony eventually began making fake accounts to message me. I would normally ignore these messages completely, and just continue blocking whatever account he was messaging me from at the time. But after several weeks of this, I was eventually sent a message that caught my attention. It was from another one of Tony's dummy accounts. The subject of the message was my full name. I was totally caught off guard, and a feeling of dread began to sink in. I stared at the message in shock for almost 30 seconds before finally opening it. Inside the message was even more bad news. It contained even more of my personal information. The town I was from, names of my family members and close friends in real life, and even the high school I was attending. I had no idea how Tony got all of this information of mine, but I was definitely scared. My parents lectured me about keeping my personal information safe once I started gaming online, and I was afraid to tell them what had happened. I also didn't want to feed into anything that Tony was doing, but I decided to message him one last time. I told him to leave me alone, and if I continued getting messages from him, I was going to the police. To be honest, I wasn't really sure at the time if what he was doing was even illegal, but I still wanted to threaten him, just in case it helped. And it did seem to help, at least for a couple days. A couple nights after I sent that last message to him, I was finishing up playing online and getting ready for bed. Once I hopped into bed, I grabbed my phone and was about to put on some music. That's when I noticed I had a text message. I unlocked my phone and noticed it was from both a phone number and area code that I did not recognize. My heart sank when I clicked on the message. It was a picture of the school I attended. I knew immediately that it was Tony. I began to panic and reached out to a couple of my friends from school to talk to them about it. They both told me to tell my parents what was going on, but I still decided I didn't want to get them involved. I know in hindsight that I should have, but at the time I was just too scared of what their reaction would be. I just wanted him to leave me alone. I didn't want to give him any type of reaction that he was hoping for, so I decided to just ignore him. I had school the next day and was barely able to sleep the night before. I was so nervous to start the day. I didn't know how Tony was getting all this information about me, but I knew he was behind this. I made it to school safe, and during the first few periods, I was constantly looking around in paranoia, making sure Tony wasn't lurking around. I'll never forget what happened next. During my 4th period class, we were interrupted when there was a knock at the door. I almost had a heart attack when I saw that there was a police officer at the door once my teacher answered it. Thoughts began racing through my mind. I was worried that this psycho had found my house and had done something to my parents. My fear only intensified once my teacher looked over at me and called my name. I jumped up immediately and walked over to the door. The police officer brought me out into the hallway and began walking me to the office. I was asking all sorts of questions. He told me my family was fine, and he would explain the rest in just a moment. When we got to the office, in addition to my school principal, there was a second police officer and one of my best friends. That's when they asked me if I knew Carl. I didn't know anybody by that name, but soon found out that Carl was Tony's real name. Not only that, but he wasn't 15. He was 42. One of my friends that I spoke with the night before about what was going on overslept that day. After getting to school late, she parked in the very back of the parking lot. As she was walking towards our school, she noticed my car. And then she noticed the car next to mine. In it sat a middle-aged man. She immediately put everything together and continued walking quickly to the school, pretending she hadn't noticed the man. She then went right to the principal's office, who promptly called the police. My parents showed up a short time after. They were both upset, which was to be expected. They were mad, but also glad that things didn't end up worse. After searching Carl, they looked at his cell phone and were able to link it up to being the same number that sent me the picture the night before. Further investigating uncovered that Carl did a reverse image search on all of my profile pictures, which led him to my personal Facebook page. From there, he was able to gather all sorts of information on me. He developed an obsession over me, to the point of traveling across several states to stalk me in person. My friend saved me that day. If it wasn't for her, I don't know what would have happened to me. But the fact that he followed me into the parking lot and picked the spot right next to my car makes me think it wouldn't have ended well for me. I am much, much more careful when I do anything online these days. And if you take anything from this story, I strongly encourage you to be too. I started playing video games when I was a very young child, and I've been playing them ever since, well into my 20s. Over the course of all of these years, gaming has brought me all sorts of joy, but one time, when I was a little younger, it actually almost cost me my life. By the time I was a teenager, I had been gaming for years. It was around this time that online gaming really began to take off. I used to play almost every day with my friend Zach. We would play online together, both from our own homes, and sometimes together playing split screen. Through our teenage years, we were the stereotypical punk teens. We basically specialized in talking shit to people that we played against, and this often caused a lot of people to get upset and send us hate messages after the match ended. And for a long time, it was just that, an exchange of shit talking between us and other random people. Some people would get angrier than others, but all of the fighting would always die down shortly after we were done playing. Zach and I had a lot of friends online we met over the years. One day, Zach introduced me to a friend of his named Mike. Mike turned out to be new to the game we were playing, and I figured Zach met him in a match and accepted his friend request basically out of charity. Although I wasn't completely opposed to helping a newbie out, I was 18 at the time and still a massive punk. Because of this, I gave Mike a pretty hard time. Things went from talking shit about one another's gaming abilities to trying any way we could to talk shit about the other personally. We really didn't know each other, so we took pretty general stabs at one another. Weeks went by, and Zach and I would play with Mike pretty regularly. Although Mike did improve little by little, he wasn't anywhere near the level Zach and I were. One night, I went over to Zach's house. We, of course, had plans to play online that night. Mike logged on to join us. We were waiting for one more friend of ours to finish a match and join us, so the three of us began chatting while we waited. While talking, we had mentioned to Mike that I walked over to Zach's that night and that we were actually hanging out in person while playing. This was brought up because I tried talking to Zach in person rather than through my headset, and Mike was asking what was going on. Although what I had told Zach had nothing to do with Mike, he seemed to think I was already talking shit about him to Zach. He actually seemed pretty mad about it, but let it go after a minute. Our fourth friend joined us, and we began playing some matches. All of us aside from Mike were really good, experienced players. We were just playing public matches and stomping just about anyone we faced. For whatever reason, almost immediately, Mike started accusing me of stealing his kills. I just laughed at this because he rarely got a lot of kills on his own, and if anything, he was close to stealing my kills every time he mentioned this. He got quite mad about it though, and before we knew it, we were back to talking shit to each other like normal. Due to Mike falsely accusing me of things and getting so mad, I decided I would go ahead and actually mess with him for real. I would follow him around in the game. Anytime he got a jump on someone, I would purposely steal his kill, just like he accused me of. And anytime he was getting owned, I would just let him die, when I easily could have saved him. As you could imagine, he got extremely enraged after these things happened a few times. Despite what I was doing being so obvious, I continued to play dumb and act like I didn't know what Mike meant. This only led him to being angrier and angrier. Eventually, Zach suggested we go into co-op mode. He was trying to smooth things over by doing this, but it ended up being a near fatal mistake. At this point, it was Zach, Mike, and I playing. We had decided to help Mike get a trophy in the game. This trophy happened to be one of the very hardest trophies to get in the game. After a good 45 minutes of grinding through this game on its most difficult setting, we needed to kill the 3 bosses at the end within only seconds of each other. This had to be done by everyone playing a certain role, doing different things at exact times, and not making a single mistake. Zach and I delegated ourselves to doing the most difficult things in the game, and gave Mike a role which was much easier. Our plan went well, and we were proceeding through the level without having too many issues. But once we got towards the very end, I came up with an idea. I decided I was going to bust out my biggest troll of all time. I knew it was basically going to make Mike erupt in anger, but I just couldn't help myself. Once we got to the end of the game, we had killed 2 of the 3 bosses. All that was left to do was kill the last boss, something that could be easily done with the weapons and boosters we had saved for this part. But before either Zach or Mike could do this, I threw a grenade right at Mike's feet, killing him. I threw another grenade at Zach's feet with the same effect, and, of course, did the same to myself, effectively losing the match and preventing Mike from getting the trophy we had just spent almost an hour working towards. I was waiting for him to start screaming at me and cursing me out, but I heard nothing. Instead, he immediately went offline completely. I looked over at Zach, and he was in shock. He told me I was a dick, and he was a little annoyed he spent that amount of time playing that certain level for nothing. We decided to call it a night and quit playing games. We hung out for about another hour, just talking and eating before I decided to head home. I began walking home around 11 p.m. or so that night. Almost immediately, I had the feeling that someone was following me. Zach lived in a quiet neighborhood as it was, and at 11 p.m., it was basically silent. I kept swearing to myself that I was hearing footsteps, but every time I stopped walking to look around, I would hear and see nothing. This went on for about 5 minutes, until I was finally able to spot someone behind me. They were about 30 yards away from me, heading in my direction. I began walking faster, but they were gaining on me. It was obvious they were trying to catch up to me, and when they were getting pretty close, they began shouting at me. I turned around to face them again and see what they wanted. It was at this point that I noticed that this individual had a small baseball bat with them. It was one of those novelty baseball bats, but it would still make a pretty dangerous weapon. I didn't recognize this person and didn't know what they wanted, but they were a bit larger than I was and had a weapon, so I wanted no part of it. I was confused at first, but after several seconds of listening to this guy talk, I realized it was Mike. Zach had failed to mention that he met Mike earlier on when he came over to Zach's house. Both of their moms are friends, and that's how they met. I was both pissed off at Zach and quite afraid for my safety all at once. I began apologizing and trying to reason with Mike, explaining to him that it was just a game, but he wasn't having it. Once he started walking towards me again, I began backing up. Eventually, he got too close for comfort, and I made the split decision to begin running away as fast as I could. I could hear his footsteps behind me, and knew that he was chasing me. I'm a pretty lean guy, but I wasn't in great shape or anything. I knew he was getting close, so I tried yelling as loud as I could while being chased, hoping anyone would hear me. As cliché as it is, I actually ended up tripping over a piece of sidewalk that had raised up. I couldn't see it in the dark, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground. I tried getting up to continue to run, and felt myself getting struck by the bat. Mike was over top of me, and I began fighting for my life. I knew for sure he'd hit me at least 2 more times, but things get a little fuzzy at that point. Before I knew it, I was surrounded by flashing lights and several police officers and paramedics. I looked around in confusion before realizing what happened, and this quiet neighborhood was full of nosy neighbors outside of their houses. I'm extremely grateful for these neighbors, though, as one of them called the police and also broke up the assault by yelling at Mike, telling him the police were on the way. I was brought to the hospital to be checked out. I was definitely knocked out at one point because too much time had passed without me knowing what was going on. Luckily though, aside from some bumps, bruises, and a black eye, I was okay. Mike had been found shortly after at his mom's house. He was charged with battery, but since he didn't have a record, he pled out to a lesser charge. There was also a protective order put in place, stating that Mike couldn't contact me or come near me. Zach defriended Mike after this incident, and neither of us have heard from him again. Apparently though, he ended up getting help for his mental health. I really hope he has turned his life around. I know what I did was wrong, but he took things way too far. These days, I still game, but I'm a way better teammate than I used to be. As most teens do, my friend and I abandoned every responsibility in favor of playing GTA Vice City on its release day until we could no longer stay awake or drink any more sugar water. We were at his house, a log home on the edge of a small town in western Montana. It was late fall, which meant snow, and it was coming down in droves at night. We cozied up inside and smashed cars into walls for a good while. It was a great time, but I started feeling unnerved for no obvious reason. We kept playing, and the nervousness peaked and then dissipated without issue. 3 or so hours later, around 2 a.m., the feeling came back. This time, my friend and I made eye contact. "You feel like we're being watched?" he asked. I nodded. We looked around the room, out the living room window, and the glass pane door behind us. We didn't expect to see anything, considering the tall fence that surrounded the backyard was locked. Nothing but the snow coming down in heavy flakes effused by the dim porch light. We returned to the game, but only for 20 minutes or so this time. The feeling came back, more intense than before. My survival instincts were kicking in. Again, we made eye contact and began to scan the room. Framed in the glass pane doorway was a woman in a cream-colored nightgown. She looked gaunt and pale. Her hair was red and wet. She took another step towards the door. We didn't move and just looked at one another for a moment. She began to scramble with the door handle. We didn't tend to lock our doors in Deer Lodge, so she was able to open it and start her way inside. My friend stood up and threw himself against the door, pushing her out and locking it. As he ran to get his dad, she took off around the corner. His dad eventually emerged from upstairs in whitey-tighties, cradling a shotgun. We looked for her outside, but she was nowhere to be found. The snow had already covered her footprints, as wet and heavy as it was. We all came down from the adrenaline and considered what had actually happened. So it probably wasn't a ghost, but someone who'd locked themselves out in the neighborhood. But who locks their doors here? How and why did she get through the fence and into the backyard without ringing the doorbell up front? I still have no idea. But now, whenever I stay up late playing a game, I check the windows instinctively every hour or so just in case.